watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
I'm Mark Golub, and this week we're focusing on the death of Osama Bin Laden, on some of the questions raised about the U.S. action in Pakistan, what Bin Laden's death means in the war against Muslim extremism, and what his death may mean for the state of Israel and the Middle East. I hope you've had a chance to hear the thoughts of Daniel Pipes and Barry Rubin, which are also airing this week on Shalom TV. But right now, I'm very pleased to be sitting with two individuals whose perspective and analysis I look to often when there are critical issues and events of importance to us all. First, I'm joined by Micah Halpern, who is a frequent analyst on network television in the areas of terror, the Middle East, and Muslim fundamentalism. His latest book is entitled Thugs, and he's also the author of What You Need to Know About Terror. Micah has his own very popular blog, The Micah Report, and his weekly feature, A Safer World, airs on the U.S. radio network. And Micah, thank you so much for joining us again.
It's a pleasure.
And I'm also joined by someone who's certainly no stranger to the Shalom TV audience, one of the most thoughtful and reasoned Jewish leaders on the American Jewish scene today, and one of my favorite people, Stephen Bayme, National Director of Jewish Communal Affairs at the American Jewish Committee, and Director of its Koppelman Institute on American Jewish-Israeli Relations, which means that Steve is involved in virtually every aspect of Jewish life today. And by the way, just last month, Stephen was honored by the AJC for his 30 years of professional service to the Jewish community. And Stephen, as always, it's wonderful having you with us.
Great to be with you, Mark.
So, gentlemen, I just want to begin by giving you a chance to say whatever is on your mind. I've said here on Shalom TV, from now on, people will always ask, where were you on May 1st when we heard that Osama Bin Laden had been taken out by the U.S. Navy SEALs? Michael, let me start with you. What was your original reaction? What was your thoughts? And what do you feel this means for the United States?
Well, my original thoughts were, I have to confirm it. We're getting all these reports in. And remember, as things were coming out, it wasn't clear. We were getting hints from media sources all over the place that this may have happened, it could have happened, it would have happened, maybe the president's coming. Then he was pushing off his announcement, and for 45 minutes, an hour and a half, we're waiting for the president to actually come out and say. So for those 30, 40, 50 minutes, I'm rushing to try to find someone that actually knows something. And for one of the most unique times in the history of Washington, everyone was tight-lipped and no one had anything to say about what the president was going to say other than you're just going to have to wait.
So you could not confirm this on your own before the president spoke.
Which was very, very interesting and very unusual within the Washington world. Because in Washington, for a cup of coffee and the promise of a beer, you can get almost any secret you want. And really, truly, not even scotch. We're talking beer.
Okay. All right, and then you do hear, and you realize it has happened. What was your immediate reaction?
Well, certainly pride, glee, and then it's about time. And the about time actually sort of settled in for a good few hours because it was late at night, and I continued to work on that story for another few hours before waking up first thing in the morning again to do it again. And it's about time sort of rested. And then I started doing calculations, like how much time and how much money, how much energy, how many man-hours went into pursuing this particular character. And we're talking millions of man-hours, trillions of dollars.
Worth it?
That's really was the upshot of the question. Yes, it's worth it because symbolic victories are still huge victories. Pyrrhic victories are huge. Like he's a titular head, he is nonetheless a significant character. I do not think it changed the face of terror.
I will talk about that in one moment. Stephen, what was your reaction?
My reaction, I think, was less emotional, perhaps, Micah. My reaction, first of all, was to think back to Tora Bora, which really was close to a decade ago. December 2001, he was within our sights, and he got away. And my first reaction was, if only, meaning, had he been killed at that point, I think the impact would have been far greater, both in terms of American self-confidence and in terms of the war on terror itself. My second reaction, as a direct follow-up to that, was, unfortunately, he's had a full decade to build an infrastructure. In which case, my reaction was, sure, there should be satisfaction that it was done. Tremendous sense of admiration for the special forces that were able to pull this off.
Amazing job.
Amazing job. But in terms of the impact, in terms of global politics, in terms of international relations, in terms of the Middle East, my real concern, I guess, was I said, okay, good, congratulations, but the way ahead is very long and by no means free of danger.
Did any of the celebration bother you, Stephen?
I felt there is a natural reaction that given the attack on America that did take place and everything that was evoked after that, that sense of celebration on the baseball game that was being aired at the Met Stadium that night, it was fully understandable. I could not empathize with it, though. In other words, I could not participate in it. So in that sense, I understood the celebration, understood where it was coming from. I would not be critical of it per se, but I also knew that, no, I could not and would not participate in it.
What was your reaction to the celebration?
Actually, and I spoke a lot about this and wrote about it too, and it disturbed me quite a bit. And more in the sports metaphor. We are very good at what we do in fighting terror and in presenting ourselves to ourselves. But one of the most important elements is that we're not bad sports about it, and we shouldn't be. And one of the things that we teach our children is that a victory is a victory, and you can celebrate the victory, but within a tasteful style. And I thought this was distasteful. I thought it was inappropriate. Like a great victory, a romp doesn't get celebrated. A tight game gets celebrated, but nonetheless, you don't rub the face of the loser in it. And that's what it was. And that disturbed me quite a bit, emotionally, intellectually, but more important than that, values-wise. Okay. It was not the proper value.
It was spiking the football.
Well, that's exactly what
the president said. Exactly.
Oh, wait. The two of you give me
which is illegal, by the way.
The two of you give me chills, and you also give me some comfort. I feel I've been sort of fighting a battle alone. I'm also involved with the Russian Television Network of America. I went on the air with the viewers of RTN, all Russian-speaking viewers. And I said basically that while I understood this was a wonderful symbolic moment for America, and I understand celebrating victory, not necessarily the death of Osama Bin Laden, there was something about it that was unseemly to me. And as a rabbi and somebody who studied the Jewish tradition, I remember how at the Red Sea, the children of Israel were told not to celebrate as the Egyptians drowned. There's a tradition in the Jewish community where the call of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is to remind us of the wail of Sisera's mother, Sisera being a general who was fighting against Deborah, and he was ultimately killed by Yael, a stake put through his head. But there's a mother waiting for her son, who happened to be our enemy, but he's still a son. And that Jews don't revel in someone's death. And so, and one more thing I'll tell you. I spoke with Lyz Glick. Does that name anything to you?
No.
Lyz Glick is the widow of Jeremy Glick, who was one of the 4 people who was on United Flight 93 who took down that plane in Pennsylvania. And Jeremy Glick was Jewish. Lyz Glick was married to Jeremy, and she said the same thing to me, that the degree of celebration made her uncomfortable. So I am comforted in some way to hear the two of you each say, while we're very proud of what the forces did, there was just something over the top to me, almost a little bit mob mentality. Micah, do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, and it surprised me, but it didn't surprise me that the vast majority of the people who were celebrating were kids and college students, and it was in the heat of the night, and the darkness of the night, which is the people who were up and out and and around at those hours also, there was a sort of a wave to go to the White House, a wave to go down to Ground Zero. And the people who are up at those hours are going to be the people who are looking for a party. And so we've got to look at that and understand that also. So there's a sociological dimension of that too. It is deeply shocking, though, that there wasn't, not a condemnation, that there wasn't a clarification. We are sports about the way in which we approach this stuff. Just like, by the way, if Osama bin Laden would have raised his hands and given up, we would not have been able to have killed him in the process of that attack.
That's interesting. Do you believe the order was to capture him or to kill him?
I think it was assumed that it would be a mission to kill.
And you?
I have an enormous amount of difficulty assuming that capturing him really would have been feasible. In other words, that had they done so, I would have been even more amazed. Expecting him to be killed under the circumstances, there was a firefight going on, danger to the to the SEALs involved. Hard to imagine any other scenario.
There are people who've said that had he been brought back alive to stand trial, not only would it have been a protracted, maybe a decade-long trial, but it would have opened up all kinds of possibilities for terrorists to hold hostages for his release, create havoc on an international basis.
As well as probably a propaganda victory in a lot of ways.
So in some way, although I would like to believe that if he had, it turns out now he did not have a gun. If they'd come in and his hands were up, I would like to believe we would not have shot him in the eye. But I also understand that it would have been problematic. This wasn't an Eichmann situation where there was something very powerful about being able to put Eichmann on trial. It's ironic, it is the 50th anniversary of the Eichmann trial.
Right.
And here you had someone who went on trial. It enabled Israel to discuss and to show the Holocaust. And Daniel Pipes made the point that in the 50s, people weren't talking about the Holocaust as they do now. So there was some value to it. Although Eichmann was given the option to be killed immediately or taken back to Israel for trial. So I would have liked theoretically if he had surrendered to bring him back, but I understand that there are benefits to the fact that he was killed on the spot.
I know that they spoke about this in the White House beforehand.
You do?
I know that these were discussions that were being made over the last 6 months. And I also know, and I've written about this and talked about this a lot, I am not certain that in the court of law in the United States, Osama bin Laden would have been able to stand trial and be convicted. Given the structure of the way in which Al-Qaeda works and the way in which he created it, at best, he is a conspirator, at best. Direct operational leadership, none at all. And so it's important to see that also. But there's another element in terms of the capture versus not. See, from our point of view, once again, the team player and the player of a team, one has to say, well, just a second, if a person is helpless, do you shoot him even in an operation? If he's not a threat to you, do you? What do you do? And I realized that they were working under CIA issues. And there's a moral question here. There's no doubt if they have a weapon, and if they're shooting, and if your people are in danger, there's a serious question. Then it's a slam dunk, as we would say. On the other hand, though, if he's a serious danger to the society and a serious enemy, we also have a moral obligation, or at least ability, to take a person out. And Israel has done that on numerous times and at numerous occasions. The question, though, is here with regard to this. It seems right now that there was only one of the 5 people who were actually there with him was actually armed against 22 or 24 SEALs. Now, I'm not saying we should have taken him and arrested him. I don't think that would have been the right answer. However, I do think that it's an important question that we have to ask ourselves, an important one that when asking, that we come to the conclusion, indeed, that his killing was justifiable, not just legally, but also morally.
Well, if we're going to deal with the moral question, I think Jewish tradition really is here quite relevant. You're quite right in invoking the Red Sea and let's not celebrate when people die. That certainly is one major aspect. The other major aspect is that when you're fighting a war, it has to be fought to victory.
That's correct.
And
Absolutely.
in that respect, Osama bin Laden was a sworn enemy of the United States and a very dangerous enemy. And in that respect, a decision is taken both on the spot and in the planning of what's the best way of overcoming this enemy.
Okay, what did the two of you think about the fact that we buried him immediately at sea?
My understanding was that was in some extent in deference to Islamic tradition.
That's so hard for me to believe.
Well, I can understand. I could describe a little Islamic tradition.
And by the way, I just want to say,
Yeah.
there have been at least one, if not more, major Islamic leaders who said that's nonsense, and that what the United States did with Osama bin Laden on that boat and dumping him in the sea was a violation of Muslim practice.
Let me talk to this issue because I have some background on the question. First, the United States in general doesn't understand religion as a rule. And that happens to be the case with Protestantism, Catholicism, Judaism, and especially with regard to Islam. And nuance and distinctions is also really difficult. So I'm not saying they don't have advisors on Islam. What I'm saying is that they don't necessarily have nuanced, varied opinions on the question. In general, burial at sea is acceptable in Islam only when no other option is available, which is an important element. The next, which, by the way, happens very often when you're at sea, especially when you read medieval texts on Islam. You actually see people being buried at sea because there's no other option. The other option would be potentially endangering the entire ship. The other concept, which is very similar to Judaism, is immediate burial is preferred to anything else. Now, that being the case, as well as, by the way, there is, lahavdil, there's a concept of tahara, of sanctifying the body through proper washing within Islam also. All that did happen actually on the aircraft carrier, which is
Yes, I
interesting.
understand.
That being said, what the United States then followed is they took an example from medieval burial at sea and applied it to today's experience. And that's where the problem was. So we have some leaders, especially out of Egypt, and Egypt is one of the major Islamic academic centers in the world today, saying that that's an exception. That should not have happened on a regular basis. Now you have another problem. No major country wanted to accept Osama bin Laden's body, especially Saudi Arabia. The other major...
What does accept mean?
Well, you have to, you have a body here, and it now has to be transferred somewhere. It's in the possession of the United States.
Okay, so let's bring it to a U.S. base in Germany.
And bury it there.
No. By the way, we didn't bury Eichmann in Israel.
Right.
Ultimately, the body was burned and his ashes
Exactly.
were scattered over the Mediterranean Sea.
Yes.
Let's do the same thing to Osama bin Laden.
That would have been a violation of
What
Islam,
bothers, by the way, who and so what?
Oh, that goes
And by the way, even in Jewish law, if somebody is a murderer, or if someone is involved in a crime, and the state has an interest in postponing the funeral is postponed.
Yes.
There was valid reason for the United States to say, we want to bring the body back, we want to get everybody who wants to look at it, we want to make sure every test is done so that nobody has any question about it. And when it's all done, at that point, if a Muslim group wants to come and take the body, let a Muslim group take the body. If not, and I don't understand why there was this rush to make the body disappear.
They didn't want to make any location of a burial a site
I
for
said,
pilgrimage.
throw him over the
Russians
throw his ashes over the Mediterranean Sea.
This administration in Washington does not and still does not want to insult and offend the Islamic body as a whole.
Are they right?
They are wrong.
They're wrong.
They're wrong also in terms of the picture and photograph issue, which I'm sure we'll talk about
Yes.
later on. But this is exactly the issue. Fundamentally, though, your question to me was about Islamic tradition. You should know, by the way, there's some spectacular Islamic responsa literature. I'm using the Jewish translation of that concept from the 19th century about murderers who should not be buried in an Islamic
That's right.
graves
At
cemetery,
all, right.
because by conducting themselves in that way, they remove themselves from the Islamic tradition. As a result, do not get those rights.
Do you have any thoughts
Interesting.
on the fact that they got rid of the body so fast?
My initial thought was basically a sort of a ho-hum reaction, namely that there are more important questions to be raised here and more important issues. Why that decision was made, who made it, under what circumstances.
If it was an attempt to appease the Muslim world, how do you feel about it?
I don't feel terribly strongly one way or another. In
Okay.
other words, that bottom line is that it's Al-Qaeda that was the major threat. I understand everything that Micah's saying about the administration is certainly demonstrating enormous sensitivity towards the Islamic tradition, and there's room for discussion of that. I don't think that particular incident of throwing the body into the sea is a major issue or a major item in this question of America's relationship to Islam.
I agree.
You
All
know,
right, how about the pictures? Should the pictures be shown? And by the way, by the time this program airs, they may have been shown. But as we're meeting right now, it's still up for debate, or actually the president has said he is not going to release the photographs. How do you feel about that?
I think he's wrong. I think a photograph at least should be released, and for several reasons. The most important is that the Islamic world in general is a world that is rife with conspiracy. I'm not talking about the extremists. I'm talking about the average member of the society, and they love conspiracy and build on conspiracy, and stories take a supernatural life. And in that way, it has to get out there. Just like with regard to Saddam Hussein and his sons. I can't imagine the pictures are worse than Saddam Hussein after the hanging. Because a hanging actually explodes your head to 2 times the size of your normal head after the hanging. So it balloons like you'd never believe. In this particular case, I don't think there's any question that should be given out. Now, not just that, there are skeptics that need to know that this happened. I think it's wrong not to show it.
I disagree, Micah. Again, I also say it's not the most important issue involved here, but I really disagree. The conspiratorial tradition, if you will, which is deeply embedded not just in the Islamic world, but we have it here in the States, it's not a tradition that needs to be fed. You know, in other words, the tradition is there. It represents some of the worst elements in American political culture. People are saying that 9/11 was a plot by the Defense Department. To feed into that, to offer it any kind of legitimacy, I think is a mistake to begin with. Secondly, I've never understood the American desire, if you will, that let's get everything gruesome out. In other words, let's put it all out there. There are things, like in this case, where I just don't see the social value or utility in permitting it.
Okay.
So in that sense, I think the president was right about it.
Okay.
Even though, notwithstanding, obviously there's been a lot of debate within the administration.
Oh, yeah.
And there certainly has been a considerable amount of shifting ground there. But frankly, I think he was correct in saying there's nothing to be accomplished by releasing the photos.
There was a Photoshop picture that went out on Monday and went unbelievably quickly through the Islamic world. I mean, unbelievable. And it was an old picture of Osama Bin Laden from 15, 20 years ago with this little wisp of white hair in the middle of his beard. And he had a turban on. And the Photoshop removed his turban and then had that image of the bullet through the head. And even an untrained graphic person could easily see, if you knew the original picture, which I just described, you see that this is a Photoshop. But it went through like you'd never believe. And then people were very excited within the Islamic world. Oh, he's finally dead. And then it became a canned thing. Oh, you see, it's a part of the conspiracy again. You see, it really isn't the case. It's all a game for President Obama to be reelected and all these other kinds of things, which we're starting to hear a lot about in the Islamic world itself now.
I have a different reaction. But I think that given the fact that the body was disposed of in a way that just seems unreasonable to me, I felt that there was some value in showing the pictures. But beyond that, it is I feel that Dershowitz has expressed this best. There's a First Amendment issue here. And I think it would be a terrible precedent to let a president of the United States decide what newspapers can and cannot print when it comes to a photograph of somebody who was shot in a military action. And I don't understand why the New York Times and the Washington Post and you, as a journalist, is not saying this is absolutely unacceptable. You don't want an America in which a president has the right to make that decision, especially when there is no imminent national interest here. And that it seems to me that you want, the picture is gruesome, it's not gruesome. We see gruesome things all the time. This is a picture which people want to see. And there's not a reason in the world why the government of the United States should tell you or me, or the New York Times, or Time Magazine, or a paper in France, that you can't have those pictures. And for Jews, the First Amendment has been a treasured pearl of the American system. And so I'm surprised that you, who in general tend to be very much in favor of the Bill of Rights,
Absolutely.
why you would not have said, I don't know if it's necessary, but I don't think the government should tell the media and the people what they can and cannot see.
As far as government's concerned, the only real issue then becomes one of national security.
There's no national security here.
Well, again, that's something I think will be debated in the weeks ahead.
Okay, so would you say the same thing about the, I can't believe it flew out of my ear, the Pentagon Papers?
In 1971, when the Pentagon Papers were released, I really did have concerns initially about national security. Once I read them and realized it was an historical account of all the blunders that we made that brought into Vietnam, I said, of course, it's a landmark case that the government does not have the right to release it.
Do you understand how many times you've argued in favor of having things disclosed that the government doesn't want to disclose?
In general, you're absolutely right.
And it's always the argument of national security, always. And time again, you've been proven right. So that instinctively, if there's an error, I want the error to be in favor of the First Amendment.
Disclosure, as opposed to.
Yeah.
But I think Stephen's ultimate point of being tasteless and irrelevant
I just don't want to
It's
say
also
that.
irrelevant. No, it's irrelevant if it's tasteless.
I understand that.
That's not why you don't show it. And that's not why the president really is arguing against it.
No, he's
It's
feared.
the same thing.
He's afraid.
It's the
The president
same,
is afraid.
It's the same
It's not national
thing that
interest.
you're critical of before, that there is in the administration. I don't know if it's the president himself or whether it's the administration as a whole. It is very deferential in a way that does not seem to be realistic or helpful to the Muslim world.
I agree with that. And he is afraid. There's no doubt about it. And this decision is based on that more than anything else.
But what social purpose do you see as being served by releasing the photos?
Well, first of all, if I do believe that the First Amendment is something which must be protected, there's a social good there, regardless of whether people like the picture or don't like the picture. I also find that if you show, revealing is always better than hiding.
Absolutely.
That socially, it's better for a country and for a psyche of a society. So that it's not about, do I think it's going to end conspiracy theories? I think you said that very well. They're nuts. And we should not do things to try to convince people who are, I had somebody call me last night on the Russian television network, and her theory was they had done this many months earlier, but they waited until Yom HaShoah to reveal it, so that Yom HaShoah didn't make the front page of the newspaper. So there are nuts everywhere. There's nothing you can do about that.
So that's not my... Yom HaShoah was actually the day before.
I know, and I said that to her. You're exactly right.
Because it's a nidche, we push
exactly
it up.
right. So you understand, my point is, there is a social good in two ways. Number one, it protects a principle that is very important for this country to protect. You don't want to give the executive branch the right to censor. And number two, I believe it just is always better for a society for everything to be out there, and we live with it and we move on. And so that's my reaction.
Look, on the social level, as opposed perhaps to the governmental level, my concern and fear would be is that young people do have this fascination with what I would call gruesome material. Yeah. This will be all over the internet.
So
what?
It won't be the first or the last, Stephen.
It will neither be the first or the last, but it will be it'll be a dominant central experience of people saying, I saw it. It enhanced this kind of empathetic glee that I was part of this this bloody event, and in that sense, I just
and you're willing to give up the First Amendment for
no,
that?
I say as far as the governmental side of it, I think your points are well taken. Whether society is served well by releasing the photos, there I tend to take a somewhat different view.
Yeah, I would agree. Actually, I think it's essential to come out. I think that there is a macabre lifestyle that we have in the United States, especially amongst youth. However, I think in the end, they will come out. Because again, because the conspiratorialists are not correct, in the end, it's almost impossible to keep a secret. Someone is going to leak it, because that's the way this world works. Eventually, it's going to happen. I know that.
Yes, that's another reason for the president to let it go. It doesn't have to be leaked.
It doesn't look good.
It should be the government of the United States that says, okay, we're going to honor the First Amendment and just show it. But we'll see. Gentlemen, we have to pause for a moment and then we'll continue. I have the great pleasure of speaking with Micah Halpern and Stephen Bayme. Please stay with us.
It's been a season filled with highs and lows. See it all come to a climax in the season finale of From Date to Mate, premiering in May on Shalom TV.
In your eyes, the light, the heat, I am complete.
I'm Mark Golub. I'm sitting with Micah Halpern and Stephen Bayme, and we're discussing the ramifications of the death of Osama Bin Laden. Okay, so let's leave the side questions to the side. The real issue here is, what do you feel this means in the war against, and I'm going to now use not the war on terror phrase, I'm going to say the war against Muslim extremism. What do you feel Osama Bin Laden's death means for that?
Its most important element is the message to American society and the message to the extremists out there that America is not giving up this war. America is convinced that it can wage it and wage it to victory. It's a very powerful statement to America of what we're exactly capable of. And it's a powerful statement to the people out there that their actions don't come without cost. So in that sense, I was very gratified that it was done, not because it changes the facts on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
The facts on the ground is that, as I said earlier on this program, is that he's had a decade to build an entire infrastructure, and even more than a decade when you consider he's been active since the 1990s. So in that sense, the facts on the ground probably, I wish they were changed by this. In other words, I'd like to be able to say they've lost their leader and they'll never be the same. Obviously, I'm not that confident. But I am saying that Americans should take a great deal of confidence from this in terms of our capacities. And the terrorists out there should know that their actions are being watched very carefully and that we expect to fight against them.
One of the most critical lessons is for us to be able to tell our children and the people who are actually in the battle that it counts, that we do win, there is an end. And these ends, these goals are achieved. A lot of times you can't pronounce the goals. A lot of times you can't announce them and you can't celebrate them. But in this particular case, we see one of the goals found. You see, we subscribe here in the United States, as they do, by the way, in Islam, to this concept of big names. We don't know the other names in Al-Qaeda. We only knew the name of Osama Bin Laden. And it's interesting, getting him was an essential component to that victory, if only because that was the translation to us. That was the name we knew, not just the face of terror. That was the representation of all of that. And getting him then meant that we're that much closer to the next stage. Now, what's going to happen next and who's going to be the next name? We have to present a name because that's the way we wage this war. And I'm not talking about the analysts. I'm not talking about the few hundred people that actually know all the details of Al-Qaeda. I'm talking about the millions of people who are involved in the process, as well as the propaganda war. It is a propaganda war. And in that moment, psychological propaganda is hugely important. It's important to us, and it's important to the advocates of Al-Qaeda. For a long time, this guy took on a Zorro character. He was bigger than normal, bigger than human, a Robin Hood of sorts. And literally and truly, part of it was that he could never, ever be killed because he was never found. And I will guarantee that there will be another video and audio release of him coming up in the next few weeks, because they've got an imprint, an audio digital imprint of him, as well as a video imprint of him. So they can make him say and do whatever he wants. He will continue to haunt us in that way, because they believe that. That's why it's important to actually identify this as a victory.
You have done a lot of work on the whole issue of terror.
Mm-hmm.
There are times the White House and the State Department call on you for some advice.
Correct.
I want you to comment on something that both Daniel Pipes and Barry Rubin are saying right now on Shalom TV. That in fact, Al-Qaeda is a very small piece, is almost a minor piece of the overall Islamic fundamentalism that is seeking to destroy the West. It is true that it is Al-Qaeda which attacked us on American soil, and therefore there was a reason for us to go after the titular head of Al-Qaeda. that he is really no longer, he has not been operationally involved in Al-Qaeda for quite some time, but that it is a mistake for Americans to think that the war on Al-Qaeda is the war, equals the war on Muslim extremism, and that by the administration focusing all of our attention on Al-Qaeda, they are misdirecting American attention. To what extent are you sympathetic with that analysis?
First thing there were three elements. The first element, very quickly, is it's not just this administration, it was the previous administration also. Because it's easy. Once again, it's easy to get a name. It's
Yes.
easy to have that. And when it's easy to digest, and as a result, it's easy to communicate those issues. That's a problem, because this is all not about that. The model that Osama bin Laden created was sort of creating a Ford Foundation of terror. What he did is he created at the beginning a handful of people in his camps, and then they created the webs after that. He brought them back to teach them new things, but then let them go, creating their own independent communication systems and fundraising systems. So as a result, after the first few years, he was almost irrelevant to the whole picture. That's operationally as well as otherwise. Now, bottom line though, the threats are still there, but they're not there in mass. They're there in pockets. So the web approach is huge, but in pockets in Yemen, in pockets in Sudan, in pockets even in the United States. But the biggest dangers are not the pockets. The biggest danger, there's no question, to the Western world today has nothing to do with Islamic fundamentalism and extremism. The biggest danger to the Western world is Iran. They are sponsoring a lot of these characters. They're giving money to them even if they disagree with them religiously. That's what makes it so interesting. The people who were upset with the demise of Osama bin Laden included the Iranians. And Iran was a target of Osama bin Laden. Why would that be? Because the Machiavellian dictum of the enemy is my friend.
Exactly.
And in this particular case, attacking Osama bin Laden is another way that they can attack, the West can attack Iran. Iran has the capabilities, the serious capabilities of not just sponsoring terror, but ultimately of wreaking havoc on the entire Western world, because they want to actually invert the pyramid. Their model is that the United States is on top right now. They want to invert that. Mm-hmm. They want to be on top along with Venezuela, etc. So that's the huge thing. So in that way, your analysis is correct.
I think you're right, Micah, that it's easy. You need, especially when you're dealing with a society, you need to give the society something to hang its hat on. But the question is whether the administration's attitude that we're fighting Al-Qaeda, and that's what you hear, is in some way a simplistic view that Americans wind up having, and the threat of this, the greater threat to Israel and America, is not understood.
Well, certainly it's simplistic in terms of anyone who would equate Al-Qaeda with the entire problem here of Muslim extremism. That's very clear. I also think the fact that Hamas basically its reaction to the killing of Osama bin Laden, frankly, is very chilling. In other words, here you have a group that is in effect the Muslim Brotherhood, or certainly an extension of it, and their reaction to this is one of the killing of Osama bin Laden is a major crime and a major attack upon Islam as a whole. Americans do hear that, and in that sense, to focus entirely upon Al-Qaeda clearly is seen as being simplistic. And ultimately, we have obviously an educational job ahead of us in terms of understanding what are the broader issues here. In fairness to the administration, though, let's bear in mind that as long as we're talking on the symbolic level, and there seems to be some consensus, if nothing else, that the primary victory here is a symbolic one. Yes. If we're talking on a symbolic level, for 10 years, the memory of September 11th and the things that have happened since then, in places around the world, even the failed attack in Times Square, thankfully, was seen as being by an Al-Qaeda sympathizer. So just as the attack on the killing of bin Laden is seen as a symbolic victory, the equation of Muslim extremism with Al-Qaeda, as simplistic as it is, from the perspective of the administration, it's a symbolic statement of who we are and whom we're against. That said, the real question is whether there is a softness towards Muslim extremism that is not Al-Qaeda, and that's what's being raised by analysts such as Pipes and Rubin. Again, I think if you take a look at the reaction of America to the Hamas-PLO agreement, which has not been a reaction of, which we found in circles elsewhere, of this is a great opportunity for peace. The PLO, the PA, and Hamas are finally joining together. By American terms, Hamas remains a terrorist organization. We have no sympathy for them. And we don't see this agreement as being a major step towards peace. To the contrary, when Hamas issues the kinds of statements it does, one would hope that Mr. Abbas would say, is this the kind of group you want to make peace with?
But I do want to hear the two of you speak about this. Do you want to speak about something first, though, before we go to Hamas?
I just want to continue on this line just for 1 second.
Sure.
I think Stephen's absolutely correct. There is a very important element in terms of the dangers of al-Qaeda, and that's because they are global. And the Muslim Brotherhood, with all due respect to Pipes and Rubin, they're not thinking about the global issues here. They're thinking local issues. The global threat and the threat to the United States in terror, in the location of the United States, is al-Qaeda. The Muslim Brotherhood is not striking out at the United States here, and they're not striking out at Western targets in Europe. And that's an important element, and I think it's important to see that. Simplistic though it may be, the Muslim Brotherhood is localized.
Do you expect there to be some action taken against Americans on American soil?
Inevitably. There will be, the United States now will be a target and has been a target, and it has nothing to do with whether or not Osama bin Laden was killed or not, because that is a focal point of Islamic terrorist activity. Target of America, target of the United States. And you could go down the list of priorities of targets. It's very obvious. And some are easier to get to and others are less. And we have to realize that. From the time of the first World Trade Center bombing until today, we have to recognize that the United States is on their target list. Simple as that. On the Hamas question, though, I think it's very important for us to see. It is against United States law for the United States to give money to Hamas. And that's critical for us to understand. So the Secretary of State yesterday and on Monday both said, one in a conversation with Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and one in a public statement, said that they will not stop their aid to the Palestinian Authority despite the unity agreement between Hamas and Fatah. That being said, Congress will not permit that to happen because it is against the law, because Hamas is on two major terrorism groups lists in the White House and in the State Department. So we have a serious question here. So I'm waiting for a major response from Congress to Pennsylvania Avenue's, to the White House's comments on these things.
And you'd like to see what happens specifically?
Well, I would like to see, just like in the election of Hamas to power. Remember, in the first and only election of Hamas in the Palestinian Authority, 6 years ago already, Hamas won the plurality. And as a result of that, the United States and the West pulled back, because indeed there was a unity government then. And until that unity government fell apart, the United States would not give, not just monies, give support or lend support to a group of people who were united with another group of people that preached the destruction of Israel.
Israel has frozen its payments to the Palestinian Authority as a result of the unity agreement that it's made with Hamas. Are you suggesting the United States should also stop giving the PA money?
I'd say that that's what the law says, not just that they should. They will have to do that. They have to do that.
Any reaction?
I think the most important thing to share with people in general, beyond the issue of funds, which is, I agree with you fully, is a legal question, but the issue goes far beyond funds. Let's not forget the Hamas covenant, which is signed, I believe, 23 years ago in 1988. It has never been amended. Three things about that covenant. Number one, it's an anti-Semitic document. By any stretch of the imagination, it quotes Mohammed as saying, the Jews must be killed. We rejoice in the death of the Jews. It's a battle against Jews in Judaism. Number two, it rejects the possibility of any kind of accommodation with the state of Israel. A Jewish state is theological sin. Number three, it rejects any attempts of moderates within the Muslim world to think that as Muslims, they can move towards some kind of negotiations or some kinds of compromises. Now, in that sense, we often hear other noises coming out of Hamas, but the very first and I think most fundamental challenge is who exactly are they and what's their inner nature? They've given us a covenant, a signed and sealed document that has been on the books for 23 years. I don't think we can ignore it. On the contrary, and any temptation on the part of some within American society to say that they'll be more moderate once they get into power, the first challenge is, what is that covenant all about? And is it binding? And what does it say? And let's acquaint ourselves with it.
We've discussed this before.
Yeah.
You are in favor conceptually of a two-state solution.
I think it's an absolute necessity for Israel as a Jewish state.
Okay. And whenever we've talked about that, we mean that the United States should support, and Israel should support, the creation of a Palestinian state somewhere on the West Bank.
Yeah, exactly.
And for that to happen, two things are said. On the one hand, people say, how can we make peace with the Palestinians if the Palestinians are not united? And as long as there's a Gaza Palestinians and a West Bank Palestinian community, what does it mean to create a Palestinian state? And we say that Abbas is someone who seems to be the most reasonable. I've heard many Jews come to me and say, this is our best chance. Abbas is our best chance. And Fayyad Abbas are the best chance we'll ever have. We must do it now. And I say to myself, what's Abbas thinking? What is Abbas saying to himself about what this means for a two-state solution? That he now decides he wants unity with a piece of the Palestinian community, which is adamant in its opposition, as you've just defined and described, to making peace with Israel. What do you make of this? You know, I said before, you're one of the most reasoned people in the Jewish world of Jewish leadership. How do you make sense of what Abbas has done by bringing Hamas into some kind of unity situation and then asking the world, let alone the state of Israel, to deal with him?
Yep. I'm hardly his spokesman, Mark, but I think two things have come into play here, though, and they do feed upon one another. One is what I referred to earlier. There is what one might call wishful thinking, namely that if you bring Hamas in, they will slowly but surely become part of the moderate mainstream. I think
And Abbas may think that, yes.
I think Jimmy Carter, for example, thinks that, and I can't be surprised then if Abbas thinks that.
Okay.
Secondly, there's no question in my mind that the pattern of negotiations, once this non-negotiation negotiations, but the pattern that's been created between Abbas, the chemistry, if you will, between Abbas and Netanyahu, between the PA and the State of Israel, has been one where Abbas feels that efforts must be made to demonstrate, not to Israelis, but to the Western world, you know, how bad this situation is, how deep is the plight of the Palestinians, how badly they're being oppressed. So by focusing in this direction upon bringing Hamas into the equation, he is diverting attention from what others might focus on, namely, is the Palestinian entity willing to recognize Israel as a Jewish state? Are they willing to continue to engage in negotiation process when they've stayed away from negotiations, even during the 12 months, the 10-month moratorium? They stayed away from negotiations. No, it's diverting attention from their own failures by saying, well, now we brought in Hamas. That essentially throws the ball back in the other court and say, why can't you deal with these people? So I think those are probably the two factors that entered into it. And my response to it is recognize who you've just gotten in bed with. Recognize the entity that you just brought into your structure, and that's a real blow to peace because they're not interested in peace under any circumstances.
There are two elements that I think are really important to consider here. The first is when talking about a two-state solution, I want to go on the record, I too am in favor of a two-state solution. I think it's very clear. Yet, a two-state solution without a unity government actually creates a three-state solution. A state of Israel, a state in the West Bank under Fatah and Abbas, and a state in Gaza under Hamas. And the three-state solution, very few people are willing to accept. That's number one. Number two is that there was an unbelievably powerful momentum that's been built up over the last 4 months of moving towards Palestinian declaration of statehood.
In September.
In September. Which, by the way, just as an aside, has been threatened because of the withholding of funds to be announced much earlier, even as early as June. Now, doing a quick poll of the United Nations, it seems very clear that that would be a slam dunk. That there were very few, especially over the last 2 weeks, when Abbas actually got from France now from England, from Germany, etc., huge support from the Western bloc, which indeed was actually following the United States and Israel. Now there's a problem. By announcing a unity government, by signing a unity government, they've successfully shot themselves in the diplomatic foot. Germany comes out immediately and says exactly what Stephen Bayme says. There is no way that we can make sense of this agreement. And it doesn't sit well with us because you want to actually be a member of the family of nations. This person, this group with whom you've just married, does not want to be a member of the family of nations, not allowing someone to live next to them at least. And that's a big deal. Germany immediately came out and said it. France is murmuring that they're pulling back their support for the Palestinian declaration. This is important because Israel, for months I'm shouting to Israeli leadership, if you want to confront this, you got to get on the stick. You got to run right behind the boss everywhere and start talking to the same leaders that they're getting agreements on. They refused to do it. I don't know why. They thought maybe the United States was going to come back and save them. But what saved them right now is a boss and this negotiation. And it's unbelievable. He has set back Palestinian declaration a significant amount of time. They want to raise $5 billion in June at the donor conference. They're not getting it from the Saudis. They're going to get it from the West. $5 billion for a 3-year plan to create a state, including Gaza. Now, I've read that plan, and Fayyad is a very thoughtful guy. There's a problem there, because that money is not going to be forthcoming with an agreement with Hamas. It's just not going to happen. And I think that's important to recognize.
What do the two of you think of the fact that J Street celebrated this unity agreement and is going to be meeting with Hamas in Ramallah? And I know we've talked about your feelings that J Street should be included in the overall Jewish tent, have a seat at the table. But I wondered what your reaction was to their reaction.
Well, look, as far as inclusivity goes, we this past weekend, AJC conducted together with the Rayud Institute in Israel, in Washington, we conducted a weekend for young Jewish activists. The theme was countering delegitimization, and we certainly had J Street representatives participating. So when I speak in terms of a big tent, what I'm saying is that I, generally speaking, don't like to marginalize or exclude those who are interested in working with us towards things we share in common. Doesn't mean I agree with them. And in this case, I think J Street's actions are highly problematical. In general, J Street really does believe, for reasons that are best known to themselves, but they obviously have a good many supporters both here and in the Middle East, that only the United States can deliver the two parties. There's an if-only sense of this. If only America would take the lead, then suddenly we'd enter into a wonderful new era of peace and brotherhood. The counter-argument to that, which has been the pattern of Israeli-Arab peace negotiations and the two agreements that do exist, namely with Egypt and Jordan, is that when the two parties are willing to sit down together and when they really want it, then you can attain peace. And America can best play a supportive, a facilitative role. That was actually Carter's great victory in the 1979 Egypt agreement. J Street really is operating with this delusion that America can deliver the parties, and therefore we should be pressuring America to be going ahead and doing that. I think that's an awful lot of wishful thinking and very destructive thinking.
I think you're diplomatic and unbelievably polite. Fundamentally, though, using proper language, I would say J Street is wrong. Not delusional, just wrong.
I hope that was clear, but all right.
Just wrong. And they're wrong they're wrong because they come to it with because their model is flawed. And that's why. It's not because their intentions are flawed. Their intentions are fine. And the problem is when we argue intentions. I'm not arguing intentions. I want the same results that they want. And I would hope that any serious Jewish thinker wants the same results also. But their model is incorrect. And fundamentally, it's deeply important to realize that the United States has to be a part of the process. But until Israel and the Palestinians sit down and actually work out their own issues together, we will not have a resolution. So much so, a unilateral decision will cause more problems, more damage, more pain, more deaths than anything else. And that is a deeply problematic scenario.
We are almost out of time, so I need a very brief answer. Does the death of Osama Bin Laden do anything for or against Israel?
No, nothing.
Okay. Does the death of Osama Bin Laden ensure a victory for re-election for Barack Obama?
At this point, it's too early to determine what's going to happen in terms of the election. Much too early. You don't even have a counterbalance to it. I will say, though, that it shows the mettle of President Obama and shows that he made a very gutsy decision and followed through and did a very good job as a result of it. I think that's important to do.
Obama's presidential hopes for re-election.
Look, the first President Bush won an incredible victory in March of 1991, almost the same kind of calendar sequence as this one. His victory in Iraq in 1991 was far greater than killing Osama Bin Laden, yet he lost the election. The reason he lost it was because of the perception at the time the economy was going south. Elections are fought on domestic matters. I wish, frankly, it weren't that case. Foreign affairs are in many ways slighted by the American public, and they should be given far more attention. But people tend to vote in terms of how they perceive domestic matters.
Stephen and Micah, you are wonderful to speak with. I could go on and on and on. We'll do this again. But I thank you so much for going out of your way and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you both.
Pleasure to be here.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And those are the thoughts of Micah Halpern and Stephen Bayme. I hope you enjoyed hearing what each man had to say. And one more reminder to also listen to the analysis of Daniel Pipes and the analysis of Barry Rubin, also both now available on Shalom TV, as each of them offer their insights into the ramifications of the death of Osama Bin Laden. Of course, as always, I'd love to know your reactions to the death of Osama Bin Laden and to the ideas expressed here on Shalom TV. Please be in touch with me this week by mail, email, post on my Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.